Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. My name's Jake, and today we're going to be taking a look at this cool car flip explosion shot we can make using some new exciting assets from ProductionCrate. So let's take a look at what we're going to be creating. All right, so there we go. Lots of fun to put together. The first thing we're going to talk about is pre-planning your effects and your stock assets, and then shooting your plate with those in mind, so that way they work together well. And then after that, we're going to dive into After Effects and go over all the basic compositing techniques that go into putting something like this together. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. All right, so here we are in Adobe After Effects. As you can see, I already have a couple things imported. The first thing we're going to go over is our primary shot. As you can see, we got my buddy Josiah here. He's pretending to shoot the car. It whips around, and then he observes the crash happening behind him. One of the main things I want to go over in this tutorial is how we planned to shoot this with our asset in mind, rather than just going out, filming our take, and then figuring it out later. I knew from the beginning I wanted to use one of these really cool new car crash elements found on ProductionCrate, and initially this one caught my eye. Crash SUV-A Cam D, where it flies in, crashes, and rolls away from the camera. That gave me the idea to first have an excuse for the car to fly up into the air, and then we could switch out to this asset halfway through for it to come crashing back down. Now, fortunately, also on ProductionCrate is a whole slew of vehicle models, including this modern SUV, which appears to be the same one that's used for this simulation. So that's gonna allow us to bring this in and do a quick little 3D animation and transition almost seamlessly to this asset. So with that in mind, I made this little animatic inside of Cinema 4D to show off how something like this could potentially work. First he shoots, the car flies into the air and off screen, and then later in the back half of the clip, it comes crashing back down, switched out with our pre-rendered element. Now, doing an animatic like this is a little bit overkill, but it did help us figure out what we wanted the timing to be, as well as point out a few indicators on how we could make this work better. The two main things you're going to notice about this asset that we selected is that A, it's filmed from a low angle. So if we wanted to composite this into a shot where, say, we were filming from a rooftop and there was a car crashing on the street below, it wouldn't quite work, since the virtual camera that's filming this shot is set at a pretty low angle. The second is if you check out the lighting on this car, it does appear to be outside in a bright, sunny environment. So with our relative camera movement figured out, we could film in a bright, sunny environment and make sure that the camera stays nice and low so that this asset can blend nicely when we're ready to use it. And so now that we have our shot all ready to go, we can go ahead and drag it down here to this icon to start working in a new composition. Now, the first section of this tutorial is going to quickly cover adding in our 3D driving car that explodes and flies out of frame. I'm personally going to be doing this inside of Cinema 4D, but you can use Blender, you can use Element 3D, you can use After Effects' built-in 3D system that they have now. It's really up to you, as a lot of these steps are going to be the same across different platforms. Now, since the camera doesn't have too much 3D movement, and it's mostly just a whip pan, we're going to be able to get away with using a simple point track on this, and we won't have to worry about any 3D camera solves. So for my first step, I'm going to select our shot and then add an effect called Mocha AE. Now we can click this big button to launch the Mocha AE window. Go ahead and press start, and we're going to bring our playhead back to the beginning. Let's come up here and grab the X spline tool and draw a little shape around the distant part of the road, maybe about here. Now we can click this button to analyze forward. At a certain point when it's no longer able to find the road, it's going to give you this error that says tracking terminated prematurely. That's okay, you can just click OK to this, and this will be enough data to get us started. So let's exit out of this. Don't forget to press save. Now we can come up here to Layer, go to New and choose Null Object. Now back on our car crash shot in the effects controls, we can go down to the tracking data dropdown. Click Create Track Data. You should see all of these highlight indicating that there are now keyframes. So we can change the export option from corner pin to transform, and then change the layer export from none to our new null that we made, and then click Apply. Now, if we take a look at this null, it should be following our road up to a certain point when it no longer tracks. Looks like right here, frame 75 is when we lose it. So let's go to the very last frame when it's tracked, select our null, and hit U on the keyboard. Now we can delete all of the keyframes that follow frame 75, as we don't need those. And now using page up and page down on the keyboard to go frame by frame, let's go one frame at a time and match where this null should be on the road manually. You'll notice there's a little motion tile on the edge of this because I did previously go through and stabilize and time remap this clip, but go ahead and ignore that for now since we're gonna scale this up when we add camera shake later. Now, once we're happy with the way our null is moving, let's go ahead and grab a frame probably right around here for us to use as our background plate inside of Cinema 4D. So we can come up here to Composition, choose Save Frame As File. I'm gonna change the output from Photoshop sequence to PNG. We can click here to give it an output destination and a new name. I'm gonna call this Backplate, and then hit Render. Now here in Cinema 4D, the first thing we're going to do is add our backplate. So if you hit Shift-C, you'll bring up the search window, and you can type in background to find this background object. Double-click this to add it to your object stack, and then let's create a new classic material. If you don't see the materials, you can click this button to toggle them on and off. Come to Create, go to Classic Materials, and select New Standard Material. Double-click this material, and we can rename it to BG for background. Go to the Color tab, and then select this big box next to Texture. Navigate to where you rendered that backplate, select it, and hit Open. So let's close this out and add our background material to our background object. Now next, I'm going to click this button to create a new camera, and then select the box next to the camera to activate it. And now holding Alt and using left mouse and middle mouse, we can position this grid to roughly line up with our road. That looks pretty good to me. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's pretty close, we'll be able to make it work in After Effects. Now back on ProductionCrate, we can download that modern SUV we mentioned earlier and bring it into our scene. Now we can drag the FBX of the Render Crate model into our scene. If you just let go of left mouse right here, it's going to open this up in a new project. But if you hold Shift before letting go, it's going to add it into our existing project. And that's just a handy little tip if you're in Cinema. Now press OK. And there's our car. The first thing I'll say is this is just a little bit too small. It's looking more like a clown car maybe. So let's grab our scale tool and just size this up until it looks about how we imagine it would need to be. Now let's come over here to this little cube, select and hold to reveal all the primitives, and grab ourselves a plane. Still using this scale tool, let's scale this plane up a bunch. And we can also grab this handle right here to extend it on its Z axis down the road. Now, if we click this little square next to the camera we created, we can start looking through in the viewport again without affecting the position of the camera that we set up earlier. So we can see now that the car is clipping through the ground. So let's select our car in the object stack, grab our move tool, and let's push it up so the wheels aren't ghosting through the ground anymore. Now let's reactivate our camera and push the car back in Z space way far away, maybe somewhere around here. Now let's jump back into After Effects and make some decisions about the timing of our animation in Cinema 4D. The first thing I'm gonna do is right-click on our composition, go to Composition Settings, and check our frame rate. It's 23.976, so we'll set our frame rate in Cinema to 24 frames per second. In Cinema 4D, if you hit Control D, you'll bring up the project settings where we can change this FPS from 30 down to 24. Now back in After Effects, let's figure out where we'll stop seeing our car. Looks like probably around frame 85 is the last time we'll see it. So back in Cinema, let's change our timeline ending from 72 to 85. And now let's figure out when the car should flip into the air. So it looks like Josiah shoots the gun, and I imagine this little grenade will fly out. So let's give it a couple frames to animate. We'll say the car flips into the air on frame 63 if we reference this number. If you're not seeing this frame count in the corner and instead you're seeing the time code, you can toggle between those by selecting this while holding Control. Now back in Cinema 4D, let's go to the very first frame, select our car, and create a keyframe by clicking this little diamond next to the X, Y, and Z. Let's go forward to frame 63 like we decided on while checking our project in After Effects. And let's drag our car forward on the road to the place where we want it to explode, maybe around right here. And let's create another keyframe for each. Now also on frame 63, I'm going to create keyframes for the rotation H, P, and B. Go forward to the very end of our timeline. And let's move the car forward, up, and we'll rotate it. Maybe something kind of like this. And I'm actually gonna push it up all the way so it completely exits the frame. Now create keyframes for all of these. And if we watch that back, it looks pretty good, but there's something not quite right about the way it flies up. There's too much ease on the keyframes. We want this explosion to be more of a jolt rather than a floating motion. So the way we're gonna fix that is to select our car body, right click, and go to Show F-Curves. Now this curve here on the Z position is showing our car starting at a dead stop and slowly getting quicker as it goes down the road. Instead, I'm gonna select this keyframe and drag this Bezier handle down, so that way the car is at a constant speed the whole time. And I'm also gonna move this keyframe down and do the same on the other side. Now, if we select the position Y keyframe and we zoom in here holding Alt and right click on the mouse, we can see that the car rises up very slowly. So let's select this keyframe, holding Control and drag this in like that, so that way it's a quick jolt when it flies into the air. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. In the original, I did add a little bit more animation to make the car kind of drift and try and stop before it got impacted with the gun, as if the driver was reacting to what he was seeing, but we'll go ahead and move on from this place in the tutorial, as this is gonna work just fine. Now, the next thing we need to do is convert all of these materials over to Redshift materials and build out the look of this car inside of Cinema 4D. That's a pretty lengthy process, so I'm not going to cover everything about that in this tutorial, but what I will say is that if you are also using Cinema 4D, they have a very comprehensive library over here on the left that has lots of materials, including these car paints, which is what I used in the original example. Now, also on ProductionCrate is a collection of these HDRIs to assist in lighting your 3D scenes. So whether you're in Blender, Cinema 4D, even Element 3D, you'll be able to use these to add details to reflections, and depending upon the capability of your renderer, even add in shadows that can match the lighting conditions of these HDRIs. And to add an HDRI in Cinema 4D, it's as simple as selecting this light and holding left mouse, and adding a dome light, and then under the Object tab, we can add our downloaded HDRI here to the path. So I just quickly downloaded this HDR7 from ProductionCrate. If we hit No, and we come up here to Redshift and choose Render View, we can hit this play icon to launch our IPR and check out how this is affecting the lighting in our scene. Now let's just assume you've got your materials set up, your lighting is ready to go, and it's time to render. The way to do that is to reactivate your camera, come over here to the render settings, change the output width and height to match the same resolution as your composition, change the frame rate down to 24, set current frame to all frames, and then in the Save tab, we can give it an output destination, make sure you toggle on alpha channel, and then set TIFF to OpenEXR. That's my preferred render method out of Cinema 4D. Now, I know this particular section of the tutorial was really fast and didn't quite cover every button that we had to push to make this effect work coming out of Cinema, but I tried to keep it generic enough that if you weren't diving into Cinema and you were instead using Element or Blender, you could follow these same principled steps to achieve a similar result. If a Cinema 4D tutorial where we can cover everything from materials to lighting to render settings would be something that interests you, definitely let me know down in the comments below, and we can make a plan to maybe set something like that up in the future. But with that being said, once this is rendered out and we have a car flipping out of frame on alpha, we can go ahead and jump back into After Effects and bring that in and continue compositing. Now here back in After Effects, once you've imported your car and you have this render, we can drag it down here into our composition above our car crash footage. You can grab this corner and hold Shift to scale this up, or a handy shortcut is to hit Control-Alt-F to fit it to your frame automatically. Now next we can grab the pick whip and parent this to the null that we created at the beginning of this tutorial, and if we scrub through, we can see it's nicely tracked and flipping through the frame. The first issue is that the color of this does not quite match, so let's add a levels adjustment, and then we're gonna go through the red, green, and blue one at a time to match this color. So let's click this button to change our window to view just the red, and then change the levels to affect just the red accordingly. Let's drag this over to brighten it up some. I'm looking at his sweatshirt, which is the darkest part of this frame. I wanna make sure the car is not any darker than that. So now we can toggle over to the green, and do the same thing. And lastly, the blue. And once we're done, we can change this back to display the full RGB, and I think that's looking pretty good already. And now finally, after all this lengthy setup, it's time for us to add in our ProductionCrate car crash asset, which we already have imported here, this footage crate crash SUV. So let's drag this down into the timeline right above our car crash footage. Initially, you'll notice it's flipping the wrong direction, so I'm going to right click, go to Transform, and choose Flip Horizontally. Now, similar to what we did in 3D, let's go ahead and scale this up so it doesn't look like a clown car. We'll drag it up to where it needs to be on the road, maybe something about like that. And now next, let's time this up with when it needs to fly in. I'm gonna shift this over so that way it's out of frame, probably right around here. And now if we play this back, I think the timing is working just fine, except our two biggest issues is that A, this car is not tracked to the footage, and B, it needs to go behind our main actor, which means we're gonna need to do a little rotoscoping in a minute. But let's start out with our tracking first. So let's go ahead and click this eye to hide our car for now, and then select our footage. You'll notice that there's already an instance of Mocha AE on top of this. Now, Mocha can have multiple different tracks inside of the same effect, but in order to keep this simple and separated from the beginning, I'm instead going to duplicate the footage by hitting Ctrl D and then deleting Mocha off the top copy. And now let's trim the footage in so it only starts right around when we need it to, probably about here. And then we can add another instance of Mocha AE back on. Just as before, click this big button to launch Mocha, press start, and let's bring the cursor all the way to the end this time. Now grab your X spline tool and let's draw a little shape on the road somewhere where there's a little bit of contrast. Maybe here where we can see the overlap with the line where it turns to dirt. And now we can hit this track backwards button. Now once that's finished, we can close out of Mocha. Don't forget to press save. And now let's create another new null. So layer, new, null object, select your footage, go to the tracking data dropdown and click create track data. Change the export option from corner pin to transform, and then under the layer export, change it from none to our new null. Now we can click apply. Now let's go to the very end of our timeline and turn back on our car. I'm gonna line this up and place it roughly where I want it to be in the road, maybe somewhere about here. And then we're gonna use the pick whip to parent this to our new null. So now if we scrub through, it tracks quite nicely. Now next, before we worry about making this look cooler and matching our footage a little bit better, let's go ahead and take care of the roto, which is arguably the most annoying part. So select your original footage, hit Ctrl D to duplicate it one last time. We can go ahead and delete Mocha AE out of the effects panel. And then I'm also going to click this button to solo it so it's not trying to render anything else while we're working on the roto. Now we could just do this middle section where the car passes behind him, but I do think we're gonna want a little bit of the beginning too, where the explosion is going to overlap. So let's start our roto right about here. So after you've trimmed your footage, let's come up here to the toolbar and select our roto brush. Make sure your resolution is set to full, and then double click your footage to open it up where we can begin rotoing. Now I'm gonna use this tool to draw little shapes over his body to get him all selected. If at any point you grab something that you don't need, say part of the road, you can hold Alt to change the tool from a plus to a minus so you can start erasing parts that you don't need. Once you've got him selected, we're gonna go frame by frame, making sure that the selection stays accurate as we go through this footage. Rotobrush 3 does a really good job of keeping the outline accurate, even grabbing small details like the strap on this helmet. But if at any point it's losing something that it needs to hang on to, say like this strap here, we can just add that back in by drawing a little bit more with this tool. Now, once you're finished going through, making sure your roto is accurate, you can click this button here to freeze it so it's not trying to update continuously in the background. Now, once it's finished, you'll see it turn this purplish blue color indicating that it is frozen. So we can jump back into our composition, click this little arrow to collapse the layer, and then we can unsolo it. I'm gonna hit enter on the keyboard and rename this to roto so we can easily tell it apart from our footage, and then drag this above both of our car renders. Now, one other thing I like to do on the roto layer is check this toggle that says use motion blur. And that just does a cool little interpolation where it checks the movement of the roto frame by frame and softens out these edges just a little bit. It's subtle, but if you turn it on and off, you can see the difference that it makes. Now next, it's time to match our car to our footage. So similar to the 3D render, I'm gonna go ahead and add a levels adjustment and then go to the red channel and adjust just the red of the levels. And we're gonna go through one at a time, same as before, making sure that it roughly matches the brightness of his sweatshirt. So I'm gonna jump to green, and then lastly over to blue, and then we can switch this back to RGB. The other thing I'll point out is that the camera is actually focused on our foreground actor, making the background just a little bit blurry. So let's match our car using a camera lens blur effect. By default, it's set the blur radius to 5, but I'm gonna turn that down to something maybe close to about 3. Now, if we scrub through this a little bit, there's a moment where this car is reflecting the sky from its original render, and that blue is not quite the same blue as our sky. So in order to combat that, I'm gonna add a hue and saturation effect, and then just lower the saturation some. Now, if we play this back, I think it's already looking pretty cool. So I think it's time to start adding in some of our detail elements. The first of which is going to be the explosion when the grenade hits the front of the car and sends it flying. For that, I'm gonna use one of these daytime explosion assets from ProductionCrate. I think in the original example, I grabbed this Ultimate Explosion 14. So let's download that and bring it into our project. Here back in After Effects, I've got my ultimate explosion imported. So I'm gonna drag it down here right above our car render, and then I'm gonna slide it in the timeline so it starts right at the moment when the car explodes. Now let's move it into position. All right, that's looking pretty cool. I think I'm gonna toggle on motion blur for this particular asset. And then just like with anything else we import, we need to make sure it matches the color. So let's add another levels adjustment. And for this, same as before, I'm gonna reference the dark parts of his sweatshirt for the dark parts of the explosion. And then I'm gonna keep an eye on the bright parts of the sky for matching some of these highlights. So let's first go to the red channel, we'll brighten up those blacks, and then we'll bring down the highlights till they're a little closer to the sky. Now same with the green, brightening up the shadows and darkening down the highlights. And lastly, the blue. And now we can change this back to RGB. And if we toggle on and off the levels, that's looking much better. Now for the muzzle flash, it's a combination of two things. First, one of these aerial smoke bursts. And secondly, I grabbed this energy magic burst and sped it up quite a bit. So let's download both of those and bring them into our project. So now that I've got both these imported, I'm gonna go to the moment where the muzzle flash should happen, probably right here, and drag out first our energy burst. Slide this over so it starts right when he shoots. Put it into position, right click, go to time and choose time stretch and change this down to 10. And now set the transfer mode from normal to screen. And lastly, add on a hue and saturation so we can change the master hue rotation to make it a little bit more orange. That's looking pretty good, but obviously needs to be scaled down some. So let's do that. And lastly, I'm gonna throw on a radial fast blur. Grab this CC radial fast blur and change the amount from 50 to say maybe 85. Now let's go back to the project panel and drag in our aerial smoke burst right below the energy burst. Now we can slide it on the timeline so it lines up with when the shot happens, move this into position, and then we can parent it to our null. Now let's go ahead and add in our little grenade that comes out and hits the car. In order to do that, I'm just gonna click Control Y on the keyboard to make a new solid, grab the pick whip, and then select one of these colors from the shadow under his arm. Now I'm gonna grab the circular mask tool and draw a little oblong shape, and change this over to the rectangular mask tool and chop off the back, probably kind of like that. Let's parent this to our null and then scale it down and place it roughly where it would come out of the gun at the moment of the shot. So I'd say probably right here. And now if we hit P and then hold Shift and select R and S on the keyboard, we can reveal the position, rotation, and scale and set keyframes for each of those. Next, let's drag over our layer so it begins at the start of those keyframes and then go forward to the moment where the explosion starts right here. And let's move our little pill shape down to the base of the car and scale it down till it's pretty much invisible. And I'm also gonna grab the rotation tool and rotate it so it's facing down. Now that we can see the path of our position keyframes, we can hold Control Alt and then click and drag on this first one to give this a little bit of an arc. And then let's toggle the switches and enable motion blur. All right, I think that's looking pretty cool right where it's at. So let's go ahead and pre-compose all of our layers so we can add some camera shake. If you hit Control A while you're inside your comp, it will automatically select everything. Then you can hit Control Shift C and name this Composite, so it's all collapsed down into one movable layer. On ProductionCrate, there is a free script for camera shake that you can download and install into your After Effects project. Once your script is installed, you'll find it here under Window at the very bottom, ProductionCrate Camera Shake. There's two basic options in here, Shake and Jolt. Shake is going to affect the entire timeline, whereas Jolt is more of an impact hit that affects just a small section. So with Jolt selected, I'm gonna go to the moment when the explosion first happens and then click the button that says Jolt. That looks pretty cool, but I think I want it to be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna hit Control Z to undo that, and then let's change our settings. I'm gonna change the amplitude from 1 to maybe 1.8, and then maybe we can turn down the frequency from 1 to maybe 0.6. And let's hit Jolt again. Now, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and add some color correction and call this about good. In the original example, I did have a lot more stock assets littered throughout this piece, including some dirt explosions and some shock waves, some dust hitting the camera, a few impact elements when the car's bouncing, but all of that's the same process of stuff we already covered. Just where you import it, parent it to your null, and then make sure you match the color. So let's go ahead and throw a LUT on here. I'm gonna add a new adjustment layer. The shortcut for that is Control Alt Y, and then we're gonna add the effect to the adjustment layer called Lumetri Color. Under the basic corrections, we can add some contrast, maybe warm it up a little bit, crush the blacks, boost the whites. Let's come to the creative dropdown and select one of these LUTs. How about this Kodak one? I'll change the intensity down to maybe 50%, and that's looking pretty good to me. I'd say the last thing that we need to do is add some glow onto this explosion. So if you grab your whole composite layer and hit Control D, we can add a key light effect to the top copy, hide your adjustment layer, and then grab this color picker and select the orange from the explosion. Now change this from final result to combined matte, and then drop down the screen matte settings and play with the clip white and clip black until it's mostly just the orange that's visible. Now add on an invert effect. And lastly, let's throw on an instance of ProductionCrate's Easy Glow. I'm gonna change the plugin preset to Sunset, and then change the blend mode of this layer from normal to screen. And if we toggle on and off this layer, you can see quite the difference that that's made. Oh, and don't forget to turn your adjustment layer back on. All right, and I think that's looking pretty good as is, so let's go ahead and call this good for today. Hopefully you picked up a trick or two and you learned something. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will see you guys in the next one.